The smell of bleach and desperation clung to my scrubs like a second skin. It was the permanent perfume of the emergency room on a Tuesday night, a scent I'd grown so used to I barely noticed it anymore. My world was a blur of beeping machines, sanitized surfaces, and the low, constant hum of human suffering. My feet ached from a 12-hour shift that was bleeding into its 14th hour, a dull throb that worked its way up my calves and settled in my lower back. All I could think about was the rent notice taped to my fridge, its red letters a screaming reminder of the 48 hours I had left to perform a miracle. My mother's medical bills were a mountain, and I was at the bottom with a teaspoon, trying to dig my way out. Every extra shift, every skipped meal, was just another tiny scoop of dirt that did nothing to diminish the shadow looming over me. Then came the pileup on the interstate. The world outside our hermetically sealed bubble of controlled chaos had erupted, and the shrapnel was now bursting through our ambulance bay doors. The familiar hum escalated into a full-throated roar. Gurneys clattered, voices shouted, and the air grew thick with the metallic tang of fresh blood. It was the kind of night that tested the limits of our training, our patience, our very humanity. I moved on autopilot, a well-oiled cog in a machine designed to cheat death. Triage tags, pressure bandages, fur lines, my hands knew the rhythm, the muscle memory of saving lives overriding the exhaustion that screamed in my bones. I was assessing a teenager with a broken arm, his face pale with shock, when Dr. Evans yelled my name. Nia. Treatment room 4. Laceration, deep tissue, needs immediate attention. He's private was code. It meant no paperwork, no police report, no questions. It usually meant gang-related, and it always meant trouble. My stomach tightened. I grabbed a suture kit and pushed through the curtain into the small, sterile room. 2 men in dark, impeccably tailored suits stood flanking the examination table, their presence sucking all the air out of the space. They were mountains of muscle and stillness, their eyes scanning me with cold, professional assessment. And on the table, leaning back against the wall with a grimace that barely registered on his face, was him. Time didn't stop. It fractured. My breath caught in my throat, a sharp, painful thing. It was Casimir. The boy who'd taught me how to skip stones across Miller's Pond, who'd shared his jacket with me on a freezing night at the homecoming game, whose lopsided grin had been the sun in my teenage sky. But this was not that boy. This man was carved from something harder, colder. The boy's lanky frame had solidified into a formidable wall of muscle, visible even through the ruin of his expensive silk shirt, which was soaked in a dark, spreading stain of crimson on his left side. His face, once open and quick to laugh, was now a mask of harsh angles and controlled power. The only familiar things were his eyes. They were the same impossible shade of stormy gray, flecked with silver, and they were fixed on me with an unnerving intensity. His voice was a low rumble, rougher and deeper than I remembered, but unmistakably his. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact, of possession. He knew me. Of course, he knew me. His name was a ghost that haunted the corners of our old neighborhood, a whispered cautionary tale. The boy who'd vanished after his father's arrest and returned years later as something else entirely. Something dangerous. I forced my professional mask into place, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I'm Nia, your nurse. I need to examine the wound. My voice was steady, a small miracle. I moved forward, ignoring the human mountains who tensed at my approach. Casimir gave a sharp, almost imperceptible nod, and they relaxed. The power he held was absolute, a silent current that flowed from him and directed everything in the room. I carefully cut away the shredded fabric of his shirt. The gash was long and brutally deep, a vicious slice just above his hip. It was clean, no debris. A knife wound. This needs anesthetic before I can clean and stitch it, I said, my fingers probing the edges with practiced gentleness. No, the word was flat. Final. Just do it. I met his gaze, the old defiance that he used to find so amusing flaring in my chest. I'm the medical professional here. You're in my house. We do this my way, with anesthetic and proper sterilization, Or you can find another back alley to bleed out in for a terrifying second. The cold mask cracked, and I saw a flicker of the old Kaz, a spark of surprised admiration in those gray eyes. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared. "Do it," he repeated, his voice softer this time, but somehow more menacing. Before I could argue further, his hand shot out and clamped around my wrist. It wasn't violent, but the strength in his grip was immense, a manacle of warm steel. The shock of his touch jolted through me, a jolt of memory and something new, something frighteningly electric. His thumb brushed over my pulse point, feeling the frantic rhythm of my heart. He held my gaze for a long moment, his eyes searching my face, reading the years of exhaustion and struggle written there. He was assessing me, not as a nurse, but as something. A variable. An asset. Then he released me. "Fine," he bit out. "Your way." "Be quick," I worked in silence, the only sounds the snip of scissors, the clink of metal instruments on the steel tray, and the ragged edge of his breathing as I injected the lidocaine. He didn't flinch. As I stitched the layers of muscle and skin back together with neat, precise sutures, I could feel his eyes on me, a heavy weight that made the fine hairs on my arms stand on end. When I was done, I applied a sterile dressing, my movements crisp and efficient. "Keep it clean and dry. You'll need the stitches out in 10 days. And you should be on a course of antibiotics. We'll handle it," one of the suits said, his voice as flat as his expression. Casimir pushed himself into a sitting position, his jaw tight with pain he refused to show. He stood, a towering presence that dwarfed me. He looked down at me, and for a moment, the ER, the wound, the danger, all of it faded. I was 17 again, standing under a streetlight, and he was just a boy with a future that hadn't yet been stolen from him. "Thank you, Nia," he said, the name a strange intimacy on his tongue. Then he turned and walked out, his men falling in behind him like shadows, leaving me in a silent room that smelled of antiseptic and a faint, expensive trace of his cologne. And a whole new kind of fear. A few days passed in a haze of sleeplessness and anxiety. Every shadow in the parking lot was one of his men. Every sleek black car that drove by sent a jolt of panic through me. I tried to convince myself it was a one-time thing, a bizarre intersection of our past and present that would never happen again. I tried to bury myself in my work, in the familiar exhaustion of my life. I paid my rent with the last of my savings, the red-lettered notice a mocking testament to the fact that I was only treading water for another month. The mountain of debt remained unmoved. I was walking to my car after another grueling shift, the pre-dawn air cold and damp against my cheeks, when a long, black sedan pulled up silently beside me. The passenger window glided down, revealing an older man with a neatly trimmed gray beard and kind eyes that didn't match the stark severity of his suit. He looked like someone's grandfather, if their grandfather was a high-level diplomat or a spy. "Miss Bailey," he said, his voice polite, cultured. "Mr. Volkov asks that you join us." Volkov. Casimir's real name. The name whispered in the news reports about the fall of the old syndicates and the rise of a new, more ruthless power in the city's underworld. My blood ran cold. "I don't know who you're talking about," I lied, my voice thin. The man smiled, a sad, knowing expression. "Please do not make this difficult. We are aware of your mother's situation at the Glenwood Care Facility. Her outstanding balance is $112,450. We know about your student loans. We know you are a very good nurse and a very good daughter." Every word was a perfectly aimed dart, puncturing my pathetic illusion of safety. This wasn't a request. It was a summons. The back door of the car opened with a soft click, an invitation that was an undeniable command. Defeated, I got in. The car moved with an unnerving silence through the sleeping city, the leather seats cool against my skin. We drove for what felt like an hour, ending up in the wealthiest part of the city, a place of gleaming towers that scraped the sky. The car descended into a private underground garage and stopped before a private elevator. The man, who introduced himself as Ivan, led me inside. The elevator ascended without a single button being pushed, opening directly into a breathtaking penthouse. The entire west wall was a single pane of glass, offering a panoramic view of the city, lights glittering like a carpet of fallen stars. The space was vast, minimalist, furnished with starkly beautiful pieces that probably cost more than my apartment building. It was a palace of glass and steel, magnificent and cold. A gilded cage. Casimir was standing by the window, a glass of amber liquid in his hand. He changed into a simple black t-shirt and dark pants, the casual attire doing nothing to diminish his intimidating presence. He turned as I entered, and I saw that his face was pale, a sheen of sweat on his brow. He looked worse than he had in the ER. "The wound is infected," I said, the nurse in me taking over instantly. It was a statement, not a question. He gave a curt nod. "The doctor we retain is out of the country. You have a fever," I continued, stepping closer instinctively. I reached out to place the back of my hand against his forehead, a gesture I'd made 1,000 times to 1,000 patients. He flinched at my touch, a barely perceptible tightening of his entire body, but he didn't pull away. He was burning up. His usual control was frayed at the edges, his gray eyes clouded with pain and fever. In that moment, the power dynamic shifted. The ruthless crime lord was gone, and in his place was just a man, vulnerable and sick. And he needed me. For the next 2 days, the penthouse became my hospital. Ivan procured everything I needed: stronger antibiotics, 4 fluids, sterile dressing supplies. Casimir's fever raged. He was strong, but the infection was aggressive. I cleaned and redressed the angry, inflamed wound, started in 4 to push fluids and medication directly into his system, and monitored his vitals around the clock. He drifted in and out of a delirious state, the iron walls around him crumbling. He muttered in a language I didn't understand, words rough and guttural. Once, he grabbed my hand, his grip surprisingly strong, his eyes unfocused. "Anna," he rasped, the name a raw, broken sound. "Prostimenia, forgive me." A ghost from a past I knew nothing about. I gently squeezed his hand, murmuring soothing nonsense until he drifted back into a restless sleep. During these long hours, Ivan became my shadow, a quiet, constant presence. He brought me food, coffee, and eventually, answers. He told me about the rival faction, the Bratva, who were trying to muscle in on Casimir's territory. They were the ones who had ambushed him. "They are animals," Ivan said, his voice laced with a cold fury. "They value nothing. Casimir, he has rules. A code. They have only greed." He explained that my appearance at the hospital had been an unforeseen complication. Now, the Bratva knew a nurse had treated him. They would be looking for me, thinking I was a weakness they could exploit. "You are safest here, with him," Ivan concluded, and I knew he was right. My old life, with its familiar struggles, was no longer safe. I was a pawn in a game I never asked to play. On the 3rd day, the fever broke. I was dozing in a chair by his bed when I felt his eyes on me. I opened mine to find him watching me, his gaze clear and lucid for the first time in days. The clouds of fever were gone, replaced by that familiar, unnerving intensity. "You look tired," he said, his voice hoarse. "So do you," I countered, a bit of my old spark returning. He sat up slowly, swinging his legs over the side of the bed. He looked at the 4 in his arm, then at me. "Ivan told me you haven't left this room. The patient was unstable," I said simply. He was quiet for a long time, just watching me. "I had you investigated," he said finally, his tone matter of fact. "After that night in the ER. I know about your mother. Your student debt. I know your father walked out when you were 12. I know you graduated top of your class from nursing school. Despite working 2 jobs, a wave of violation washed over me, cold and sharp." He had peeled back my life, layer by layer, examining every flaw and every struggle. "Why?" I whispered, the word barely audible. "Because I don't leave things to chance," he said, his eyes never leaving mine. "I saw you in that ER. You weren't afraid of me. You were professional, defiant. You had resolve. I don't trust many people, Nia. But I knew I could trust you to do your job." It wasn't an apology, but it was something more. It was an explanation. A reason. He hadn't just chosen a random nurse, he had chosen me. And in that moment, I understood that my life was now irrevocably tangled with his. The Bratva were getting bolder. Ivan's reports to Casimir grew more grim. They were making inquiries, asking questions about a nurse. They had a vague description. It was only a matter of time. My cage, as gilded as it was beginning to feel smaller. One evening, Casimir called me into his study, a room lined with books and smelling of old leather and whiskey. He was standing before a map of the city, which was dotted with red and blue pins. "They think you're my lover," he said, without preamble, turning to face me. The idea was so absurd, so far from the sterile, professional reality of our interactions, that I almost laughed. "They think you're my weakness. And we're going to use that." My blood froze. "Use it how?" "You are going to have lunch tomorrow at Le Cinq," he stated, naming one of the most exclusive restaurants in the city. "You will sit at a table by the window. You will order the risotto. You will be seen." "You want me to be bait?" I breathed, the words tasting like ash. "You will be the safest person in the entire city," he countered, his voice low and certain. He stepped closer, his proximity a physical force. "My men will be everywhere. At the tables, in the kitchen, across the street. Nothing will happen to you. I need them to show their hand. I need them to make a move. This is the only way to end it." He was asking me to trust him. Not just with my medical skills, but with my life. I looked into his stormy gray eyes and saw no doubt, no fear, only absolute certainty. And underneath it, a silent promise of protection that was more potent than any words. I thought about my old life, the constant, grinding fear of bills and debt. This was a new fear, sharper and more immediate, but strangely, it made me feel more alive. "Okay," I said, my voice stronger than I expected. "I'll do it." The next day felt surreal. I was dressed in a simple, elegant dress Ivan had procured, my hair styled, a touch of makeup making me look like a stranger. As I sat at the pristine white table at Le Cinq, the city buzzing below me, I felt 1,000 eyes on me. I ordered the risotto, my hands trembling slightly as I picked up the heavy silver fork. Every person who walked by, every car that slowed on the street, sent a spike of adrenaline through me. I felt exposed, a target painted on my back. Then I saw him. A man at a corner table, pretending to read a newspaper, his eyes fixed on me. A few minutes later, another man, a waiter, lingered too long by my table, his smile not reaching his cold eyes. They were here. A man in a dark suit approached my table. He wasn't one of Casimir's. My heart leaped into my throat. "Miss Bailey?" "Dmitry Orlov would like a word." He gestured towards a black car idling at the curb. This was it. This was the moment. I looked at the man, opened my mouth to respond, but before I could utter a sound, the two men I'd noticed earlier were on their feet. The fake waiter was suddenly behind Orlov's man, a hand on his shoulder. The man with the newspaper was blocking the exit. It was silent, swift, and utterly brutal. No shots were fired, no scene was made. The threat was simply erased. Ivan appeared at my side as if from thin air. "It is time to go," he said calmly. He led me out a back exit, into the same silent black sedan, and away from the life I was pretending to live. That night, Casimir returned to the penthouse. There was a fresh bruise high on his cheekbone and a weariness in his bones that he couldn't hide, but his eyes held the unmistakable glint of victory. The threat was over. The Bratva had been dismantled, their leadership broken. The city was his. He walked over to the bar and poured 2 glasses of whiskey, handing one to me. "It's finished," he said. The next morning, he presented me with a thick leather portfolio. Inside were bank statements, deeds, and legal documents. My mother's medical debt, paid in full. A trust fund established for her future care. My student loans gone. The deed to a condo in a safe, quiet neighborhood. It was a golden ticket. A key to a life free from the crushing weight I had carried for so long. "You're free to go, Nia," he said, his voice strangely formal. "You can return to your life. No one will ever bother you again. This is my thanks." I stared at the papers, at the black and white ink that represented freedom. I should have felt relief, joy, gratitude. Instead, all I felt was a hollow ache. I looked around the vast, beautiful apartment that had been my prison and my sanctuary. I thought of my cramped, lonely apartment, the smell of burnt coffee and worry. I thought of the endless shifts, the bone-deep exhaustion, the feeling of being invisible. Here, in this dangerous, violent world, I had felt seen. I had been essential. I had felt a terrifying, thrilling sense of purpose. I weighed the two lives in my mind. The safe, gray world of before and the vibrant, dangerous world of now. I looked at Casimir, at the man who was a monster to his enemies and a protector to his own. I saw the flicker of something in his eyes, a vulnerability he would never admit to, a silent plea for me not to go. He wasn't just offering me freedom, he was offering me a choice. Slowly, I closed the portfolio and pushed it back across the marble island toward him. I walked to the floor-to-ceiling window and looked out at the sprawling city, his city. It didn't look so scary anymore. It looked like a kingdom. I took out my phone, my fingers steady. I scrolled through my contacts, found the number for my nursing supervisor, and pressed call. Casimir watched me, his expression unreadable. "Hi, Brenda. It's Nia Bailey," I said, my voice clear and calm. "I'm calling to tender my resignation." Effective immediately, I ended the call before she could ask any questions. I turned back to face him, the phone feeling light in my hand. I had severed the final tie to my old life. I had made my choice. A slow, almost imperceptible change occurred in his expression. The tension in his shoulders eased. The cold mask softened, replaced by something I couldn't quite name. It looked like relief. It looked like hope. He took a step toward me, closing the distance between us until only a breath of air separated our bodies. The silence in the room was thick with unspoken words, with the weight of the future I had just chosen. I met his gaze, my heart beating a steady, certain rhythm. I wasn't a victim anymore. I was a willing participant. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of what came next. "What happens now?" I asked, my voice a whisper. He reached out, his fingers gently tracing the line of my jaw, his touch sending a shiver of warmth through my entire body. "Now," Casimir Volkov said, his stormy gray eyes holding mine, "you stay," and in that moment, in that gilded cage high above the city, I knew I was finally home.